Alright, go.
Hey guys, so we're doing the Maxxforce DT. This is basically a later version of a DT466E with the full after treatment and fuel emissions on it. So we're going to cover the fuel system flow. Basically, we're going to start here in our diesel fuel tank. There's a drain plug on the bottom of it, and right here there's the supply and return for the engine. So fuel starts its flow here and ends its flow here, and then so the fuel lines come across the back of the cab, go up the frame to our fuel filter housing and assembly. Right here is going to be our fuel supply line with a Voss connector. International's famous for using these. In here is a 100 micron strainer, and then on top right here is a brushless fuel pump, lift pump design, which charges fuel pressure to 100 psi or 90 psi, plus or minus 10 is the Navistar spec. After that, we go to a 5 micron fuel filter. This is a canister type. You pull this out and you can access that right there. And then from here, there's three paths that fuel will go. Fuel will go back to return depending on FDP pressure or FDP sensor output, which is going to measure fuel delivery pressure to the rail in the head, which is going to supply your injectors. So it's going to depending on what the FDP is commanding the ECM to do, that will in turn return fuel back to the fuel tank. So the other two methods of flow are, we're going to have one fuel line going to our DSI, which is our downstream injection unit, and that will flow to 50 psi down to our hydrocarbon injector, which is buried on the other side of the engine. It's just downstream from the turbocharger. The last way fuel is going to flow is it's going to flow into the rail of the head. There's a quote-unquote rail or passage all the way across the head, which is going to supply 90 psi plus or minus 10 psi to the injectors, which are actuated by high pressure oil. From here, the excess fuel in the head, there's a drain or a return at the back of the head, which will return fuel back to the tank. And then there's two ways for bleeding fuel out of the fuel system. One is there's this water and fuel purge valve here. There's also, Navistar recommends that you turn the key on for 60 seconds, and that will charge up fuel pressure, and then the FDP will realize that's at full pressure and start circulating fuel back to the tank. Another way we can do it is on the head. It's extremely hard to see, and yeah, I can't even show it. There's a fuel pressure test port that you can crack to bleed air, or you can hook up a diagnostic pressure gauge set that Navistar supplies to diagnose fuel system related issues. So from there, fuel heads, after all this is done, fuel heads back to the tank or is used up by the engine. So that's how fuel system flows on a Maxxforce DT and this EPA 2010 International.